Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. I'm Dan Labbe with Mary Kay Cabot and Ashley Bastock. We are getting you ready for Browns training camp. We have been doing a 23 questions series, and we're going to highlight some of those questions here on the podcast as we get ready for Browns training camp, which opens up at the Greenbrier in West Virginia on July 22nd. It is getting closer and closer. So let's do two questions here off the top. The second one we're going to get to is going to be about David Bell and Anthony Schwartz and their outlook for this season. But the first thing we're going to start with is Cade York. We love talking Cade York on this podcast. So the question is, will Cade York bounce back in 2023? And honestly, let's just frame the importance of this question before we just even get into answering the question. I think of all the things we could ask, and there's big ones, right? There's Deshaun Watson, there's Kevin's play calling, there's Jim Schwartz's defense, there are a million important questions. But Mary Kay, I think this actually might sneakily be one of the most important questions for the Browns. Like, will Cade York bounce back? Because you don't want to have this season where, oh my God, this team is actually good enough to win the AFC North, but then your kicker's losing you games.
Oh my goodness. Who would have thought? I mean, when they drafted him, we just did not think that this was going to be an issue. And it's actually a little bit shocking that he struggled the way he did, especially at Cleveland Browns Stadium. That's where you've got to be money. That's where you've got to be golden. It's not an easy place to kick. We know that. But some of the misses that he had were not even weather related. So he's got to make sure that he's playing the angles right, that he's playing the wind right. I still think he should talk more to Phil Dawson and be open to that kind of input. I think Bubba Ventrone is going to be really, really good for Cade because I think that, Bubba lived through it. He played special teams at Cleveland Browns Stadium. He knows what it's like to try to kick there. So I think restoring Cade's confidence and getting him to the point where he is just walking up and booting the ball and not having too many swing thoughts in his head, I think that's imperative. I think, once again, I think Bubba's going to be really good for him. And I don't know, he's just kind of carrying himself with that swagger again a little bit. So I think he's got the demeanor to pull out of this little rut that he ended up in.
I mean, Ashley, is it saying too much to kind of put this question right up there with the likes of Deshaun Watson and Kevin Stefanski and some of the really big kind of figures in all of this?
I don't think so, just because of all of the recent issues they've had regarding their kicking game in the last decade. There's been no consistency at the position since they parted ways with Phil Dawson. They haven't, gone through two straight seasons with the same kicker. So I do think Cade's kind of resurgence, knowing how big of a part kicking is in the special teams game and how much they've struggled with it, I think it's a huge question, and I think it's worthy of kind of being talked about in those same ways, I guess, that the offense or Jim Schwartz's scheme are worthy of being talked about. And yeah, like Mary Kay said, it's like the way he struggled was just kind of surprising, but it was similar to how he struggled as a freshman at LSU. He kind of talked about that a little bit last year. It seems like he and Bubba Ventrone are really on the same page when it comes to, they feel like a lot of the problem last year was related to him being too focused on mechanics as the season actually started. So they seem to have a plan to phase that out. So I think while this is an interesting question, it's also one we're not going to know the answer to until games actually start, because he was doing so well last year in training camp and these practices in the offseason. It's all about what's it going to look like in the games.
So as I'm looking through the memories of Cade York last year, the game log from last year, of course, there was that Carolina game. We all remember how that ended, and we've discussed that. But Mary Kay, I'm looking at a few games. The Jets, we kind of forget, but he missed that extra point against the Jets in week 2, and that ended up being part of why they lost that game against the Chargers. Brandon Staley kind of tried to gift that game to the Browns, and he missed a potential game-winning kick there. There was, there were just other games, and I know I'm missing a few here, but there were real games last year where the Browns needed him to just make a kick or two, and for whatever reason he didn't. And then even in some of the wins, there were some really concerning misses, like bad misses, like not just wide of the upright, but like just missing everything, including the kicking net. There were some really concerning things there, but you mentioned it. He's got the swagger, he's got the confidence. This feels like a guy who has the personality to say, hey, last year stunk, but that was last year. We're on to 2023.
Yeah, and the other thing I think to note too is that